I was asked if I could make this table for an upcoming wedding, but make it cheap. This one's made out of a slab. There's nothing cheap about a slab of wood. The client agreed to let me experiment with a piece of plywood. Taking a piece of plywood, using a pencil, drawing some organic lines on each side, my idea is to take this piece of plywood and try to copy what looks like a piece of solid wood live edge slab. So what I'm doing here is cutting out that organic line with my jigsaw. Then I flip it over. I have another line drawn out on the other side. Again, just an organic line, cutting along that line with the jigsaw. The edge of plywood, you can see the different layers, and it's a dead giveaway that a table is made out of plies. So I'm going to use something called edge banding to hide that, to make it look like a solid piece of wood. Here I'm sanding those edges before I apply that edge banding to make sure everything's smooth. This is my first time ever using this, so I'm sure to check out the instructions. It basically says put your iron on the cotton setting and apply some pressure. And this will activate that glue and allow it to adhere to the board. I want to make sure you keep it straight as you go. Probably be helpful if you had an extra hand, someone to kind of keep it lined up as you go. Later on, I figured out that I could tape one edge while I'm gluing the other. This is my cat, Dali, named after Salvador Dali. And here we can see how well it stuck to the edges. And again, we've got some pretty crazy curves. I don't think that edge banding is really meant for this, but again, we're just experimenting. This is pretty fun. Take a razor and you can just slice through the edge of it to create a nice seam. Be sure to hold it down nice and tight because you don't want to rip up that glue. In the background, you can hear me listening to the Making It podcast with Jimmy DeResta, Bob Claggett, and David Picciuto. If you're into making stuff, you should check out their podcast. It's pretty awesome. This is pretty satisfying. The edge banding is a little bit thicker than 3/4 inch plywood, and you can take a razor blade and slice off any of that extra. This makes it a little bit quicker than just sanding it all. But then of course come back in with the sander, sand everything nice and smooth, dust it off, and then you're ready for a finish. Here I'm using some Minwax stain, and my idea is to try to mimic what a dark walnut slab would look like. So dark walnut has a dark center, and then out near the edges where the bark is, it gets a lot lighter. So what I did is I just let the stain run out on my rag and then try to blend that out towards the edges. And it gives it kind of a natural look. I had to buff it out a lot to keep it organic looking, to get rid of all those lines that were left from the rag. That was the bottom side of the table. Now I'm flipping it over, and now I'm staining the top side of the table. I'm just using an old t-shirt to apply the stain. I found these legs off of Amazon. They were a really good deal, I think, for all four. It only cost me around $50. The screws that came with the set are a little long, so I had to run to Lowe's, get some new ones, and here's my daughter, Isabella. She's going to hand me the new screws, and they are 3/4 inch thick. So the thickness of the table, but that metal bracket will add a little bit of extra height to keep it from going all the way through. Each bracket has, I think, 6 screw holes, so plenty of support. These legs were very, very solid. I use an impact driver to put these screws in. If you've never used one of these before, it makes things a lot easier. I highly recommend getting one if you're used to just a normal drill. Alright, I'm dusting it off to get it ready for the shellac. I like using shellac because it is a finish that goes on nice and thin. You can even thin it down even more if you want to add some denatured alcohol to it. It's very forgiving. It doesn't leave any brush strokes or anything like that. Here I'm just applying it directly to the table and spreading it out with another old t-shirt. Interesting side note, shellac is made from the lac bug. The females secrete this resin that is mixed with ethanol to create this awesome finish. But it actually kind of has a nice smell to it. Though I don't recommend smelling your finishes. Be sure you do this in a well-ventilated area. Alright, let it sit for about an hour. I'm going to sand it down with 240 grit sandpaper and a little spongy pad. After you add that first stain and shellac, you'll feel all the wood grain just kind of stand up. So you want to sand that down. Here I'm using a tack cloth. These are awesome. They're kind of waxy and it grabs all the dust to get it cleaned for your next coat. Alright, here's coat number 2 using the shellac again. Now notice here, when I go to apply it this time, it spreads out so much easier because now the wood is not absorbing all of that shellac. It's really spreading out a lot easier and a lot quicker than the first time. Look at that shine.
So shellac takes about an hour to dry, and that's normally not an issue. You know, just set a timer, walk away, leave it. Alright, if you have one of these, you can imagine what he's thinking about doing.
Alright, second coat is dry now. I'm going to use 400 grit sandpaper just to kind of smooth it out. You can feel the difference with your hand. It's a little bit bumpy until you hit it with this 400 grit sandpaper and it makes it really smooth. Now I'm not applying very much pressure, just about the weight of the sanding pad. And now I'm going back in with that tack cloth again to pull up all that shellac dust. I'm going to finish it off with some paste wax. You leave the rag in the can and close it up. It's always ready to be used. Apply some wax on there pretty liberally. Spreading it out. Should be on there pretty thick. And then I just let that sit for 15 minutes. And I'm going to wipe it off with another rag. Now I ran out of rags, so I came inside and came and found an old sock with no more stretch to it. Alright, now I am buffing out that wax with that sock. And it's starting to get a nice sheen, but not too shiny, just enough. Alright, now it's time for the finish shot montage. Hope you enjoy. And that's a wrap for this project. I hope you consider subscribing to see whatever I end up making next.